Nazira in the USA, Guantanimo, Cuba, 1970.
Good morning, Georgie. Has the captain been in?
Yes, he came in for breakfast when we opened. He asked me to tell you he would be down the yellow brick sidewalk.
Was he okay?
He seemed a little excited, but didn't explain. Why do you ask?
Only because it's unusual for him to make impromptu changes in our meetings. Can you join me for coffee?
Thank you. I expect that stirring up nostalgic memories for places, events, and people by reliving one's life stories might disturb sleep sometimes?
Yes, it's one thing to occasionally recall brief stories from a distant past out of context, but it is quite a different adventure to share one's entire autobiography in chronological order. Everyone believes they have rational reasons for their actions which may seem odd to others, unless their life experience is shared, explored, and challenged, especially with an attorney's son playing devil's advocate to inspire additional insights. For example, the captain is at a challenging and happy time in his story, but his actions are better understood with a review of the years of pertinent background which significantly influenced those actions. Looking back can inspire deeper understanding and altered perspectives, especially true for me, since I had only sketchy secondhand information about him through the years.
Well, Michael, I must tell you that even from my distance, it has been an enlightening experience to observe your close relationship. I'm sure the other residents are envious of your father to have a constant companion. There is no better therapy for the elderly than sharing memories with someone close who cares to listen. I admire you for what you are accomplishing.
Thank you, Georgie. In truth, my motives are less altruistic than selfish. Meeting you has been a pleasantly surprising added attraction. If my slow progress on the book and my flying diversion makes it appear that I am extending my stay, you would be partly true. I hope you won't be moving on to new horizons soon.
Well, Michael, my plans are on the back burner, perhaps until I see how the book turns out. Now, please excuse me. I have to show rooms to a prospective resident. For a change of scenery, how about if I treat you to dinner at Fisherman's Inn tomorrow evening?
Sounds great. I'd be delighted. Thank you.
May I confirm it in the morning in case something interferes?
Of course, I am very flexible if you need to reschedule. Good morning, Captain. Georgie said you were up early. Didn't sleep well?
A dream kept me awake most of the night.
A dream or the dream?
Clever boy, the dream.
How was your flight?
Much better than yours would be with this wind today. The forecasters were right for a change.
Yes, glad I canceled. I take it there was no crosswind on your runway?
Nope, not even spider webs were disturbed.
So are you going to tell me about it?
Okay. It was like when I was 4, beginning with rolling my head back and forth on the pillow to put myself to sleep. Then seeing myself in the far corner of the ceiling, floating unsupported in a fetal position, looking back at me. Suddenly, I swapped places and saw myself on the bed.
You said that as a child during those experiences you were consciously aware and only half asleep. Is that how it was last night?
It was dreamlike at first, the same as when you found me on your first visit at this spot, floating above this wheelchair. I have a clear memory of the entire experience, but I can't say where the conscious reality of it began, perhaps with transition from an out-of-body state to finding myself standing and concentrating hard to find the place in my mind which allowed me to lift off. As I rose up several feet, I became aware that I was no longer in a dream. It was difficult for me to control my elation and remain focused, but after bumping between the ceiling and the floor several times without injury or losing concentration, I learned to more or less control my altitude within a couple of feet. To keep it simple and avoid flying through the window out of control, I did not attempt lateral movement.
Amazing, Captain. What a breakthrough. How long did the flight last?
Not long, less time than it seemed. After just a few minutes, my concentration faded, and I settled back to terra firma.
Did you feel like you was standing on something or supported in some way?
Not at all. Unlike your bird-like dream of using your arms as wings, I was in a zero-gravity state, as though I was in space. The difference from spacewalking was that I could control my movements without touching anything, albeit awkwardly. It was a once-in-a-lifetime Kodak moment for sure.
No doubt. After all those years, what do you think helped you to finally break through consciously this time? Practice makes perfect?
Some Buddhists say practice is perfect. Practice was a factor, but I think my mental boost came from reliving my past. Before we began, I was settling into giving up. Our recent exchanges about my experiences with Jean and Nazira were particularly illuminating and uplifting. I had never fully recognized what an especially critical high point the time of Nazira's entry in my life was, especially contrasted by the negative experiences of divorce in Vietnam and accented by my reaction to the 60s social upheaval. For this Shazam breakthrough, your help was invaluable, Mike.
Thank you for saying so, Captain. That means more than other rewards this visit has brought me. I hope you will have many more successful flights. You must be looking forward to exploring the envelope?
For now, I'm just reveling in the joy of having made it to the top of my mountain for the first time. For I have learned in life that the first-time thrill of such events can never be recaptured.
Yes, I remember the Corsair Squadron C.0's report of his first combat victory being better than my first piece of ass.
Crude but a fair analogy, Mike. But I was thinking of a more lofty personal achievement for comparison.
Really? What might that have been?
Let's say it in unison. We'll get to that.
All right, Captain, I should have known. Since you touched on Nazira's entry to your life, would this be a good time to return to your story?
Yes, indeed. We rented a duplex off base and furnished it sparsely, knowing we would be there only while the squadron transitions to the brand new and much improved A-7E for our imminent redeployment to Vietnam.
How was Nazira received by Navy society?
Way far better than I ever dreamed possible, thank God. Nazira received an open arm welcome by everyone. There was not the slightest trace of hostility or hesitation by anyone in accepting her completely. I was astonished and greatly relieved by my most surprising and uplifting experience of humanity.
That is wonderful to hear. How do you account for being so wrong and anticipating the worst from the wives, Mr. Psych Major?
Hell, I don't know. Maybe it was my prepare for the worst outlook. Obviously, however, I had misjudged and underestimated Navy wives.
Might you have been projecting a negative attitude toward women?
I'll just say you can't live with them or without them. But don't presume that I was too biased. After all, I demonstrated a positive view of marriage by jumping right back into a third one, right?
That's one way to look at it, but even with the fine reception, Nazira must have been under considerable pressure. She certainly had no experience to prepare her for the challenges of being a senior officer's lady or a housewife, did she?
Well, no and yes, Mike. Although her formal education was minimal, hard knocks in the school of life had taught her a level of streetwise common sense and wisdom beyond most people's maturity. Matched by her great beauty and self-assurance gained in show business and many levels of human interaction, Nazira's demeanor and personality seemed equal to any social challenge. Consistently charming in all situations Everyone loved her without reservation. She did not need a degree in English literature to succeed in Navy society.
Was that also true at home? I imagine that having earned her independence, success, and freedom after her formative years in confinement and on the run must have made it difficult for Nazira to settle down to become a wife and homemaker, particularly after having her own live-in housekeeper to care for her.
Bless her heart, Nazira did her very best, and did it well. She tried to learn the rudiments of cooking from her mother while she waited at home. Still, she could scarcely boil an egg. Neither could I. So culinary progress was slow, but our small townhouse was an easy challenge.
I assume you were away a good bit of the time. Didn't she find it boring to be home alone in a strange land? Lemoore wasn't exactly anything to compare with one of the most cosmopolitan cities of the world, was it?
We took advantage of every opportunity to drive the Austin Healey to the coast and mountains for many pleasant weekends, so time passed quickly. I do not recall that Nazira showed signs of homesickness or boredom.
So are you saying that all went well between you and there were no issues?
I didn't say that, but thankfully none of the likely factors which had concerned me before we married, age, education, religion, language, and cultural differences, materialized as issues. I recall only two minor concerns. First, Nazira was still a bit overweight, though still what was considered buxom, so that was only a matter of subtle attention to it. Another adjustment was that I got overzealous with her cultural indoctrination, especially with my love of American folk music. When she made it clear that she was not interested, I was disappointed, but backed off. There was, however, one very serious issue between us, and it was totally unexpected. Nazira was extremely jealous of my children, because she greatly feared that out of guilt, I would abandon her to go back to them. So she adamantly demanded that I cease communications with them.
What an unreasonable demand. I can see what an unpleasant surprise that must have been for you. You refused to comply, I assume?
Of course, that was my immediate reaction, but I could see that Nazira felt genuinely threatened and that I was at least partly responsible. But the trigger had only been my few letters to the kids, who were 3,000 miles away in Boston. I was firmly anchored to Navy obligations and Westpac deployment, so it must have been clear that there was no possibility whatever that I could consider taking responsibility for the children. There had to be more to her fears.
Was she worried about Olari?
If so, her concern was unfounded. I never stopped being angry at Aurélie's impractical and selfish disregard for the kids' welfare.
If so, that narrows it down to one cause, doesn't it?
Yes, Nazira's bottled up stress was greater than I recognized. I had overestimated her composure and erred in not seeing the limits of her self-assurance. I discovered then, however, that there is virtually no way for a Westerner to have a rational meeting of the minds with an emotional Muslim. Nothing I could say was going to alter Nazira's conviction. With time, perhaps she would grow to accept my kids and realize that Aurélie was out of the picture. But the only short-term action I could take to reassure her was to bend to her request.
It must have been a difficult decision whether to choose to deny your children and open the door to Nazira's future repeated unreasonable demands on one hand, or to close your mind to Nazira's feelings of insecurity for the sake of maintaining communication with your distant children.
It was very hard, Mike. Either way, there would probably be undesirable, long-term consequences, which I might regret ever after. My aviator's gut response would have been to refuse to back down to Nazira. In sleeping on it, however, I realized that Aurélie was correct in her rationale to not remain married for the sake of the children, because they would soon grow up and be gone, too late for her to begin life over. If I survived and our marriage lasted, there would have to be compromises.
Except that orally would have the self-defense evidence that you abandoned the kids, right?
True, however, since she had chosen the task of raising them without me, she was going to need every advantage she could make. Because of the distance between us, the kids weren't going to see me for a number of years. Letters would be of little interest or value to them, so my involuntary absence would have the same consequences regardless. My first priority had to be my commitment to Nazira.
So you agreed to Nazira's demand and stopped communicating with your kids?
Yes, for the time being.
And the consequences?
We moved on. Nazira did not take up the habit of being demanding, and the kids made no effort to communicate. My decision would have been different if I weren't making back-to-back cruises, or if we lived closer to the kids.
Your parents were relatively close by in San Diego? When did they meet Nazira, and how did that go?
Soon and well, happily. Nazira was at her most lovely and charming self. They both loved her immediately. In Father's case, literally, I think, whereas orally tended to alienate herself to Father as a somewhat plain New England artsy-craftsy liberal with anti-military sentiments who lacked homemaker or career interests. Nazira endeared herself to them masterfully.
Endeared masterfully? Meaning intentional manipulation?
Yes, Mike, but honestly, with great skill and the best intentions. Nazira didn't want me to be involved with my children, but she absolutely did want to be accepted by my parents as a welcomed, close member of the family. While Nazira was physically attractive, much of her beauty came honestly from within. Plus, the Arab, Chinese, and Portuguese elements of her heritage were an excellent combination, which served her personality beautifully well.
How was that?
Hard to describe briefly. Portuguese, genuine inner warmth. Chinese, honesty and wisdom. And Arab salesmanship talent. Her sisters said she was a Chinese Jew because of her uncanny business sense and ability to sell refrigerators to Eskimos.
An amazingly unique combination, Captain. Little wonder everyone loved her so dearly. Jean picked you a peach. So, what next?
The rest of the training cycle went well. Our transition to the new A7E was a welcome upgrade to the A7A with many cutting-edge improvements, including a more powerful engine, an inertial navigation system, a terrain-following radar, a color-moving map display in the same scale as the radar scope, and an extremely accurate computer-controlled bombing system.
What was your impression of the squadron?
It's a strange thing that some Navy squadrons went through many evolutions of airplane and personnel changes, yet retained a constant reputation. In its early years, VA-146 was stuck in a rut of low morale and performance. Then a CO came along whose efforts to alter that heritage included forming a four-plane formation flight demonstration team he named the Blue Diamonds, which boosted morale and helped transform VA-146 ever after into one of the very best Navy squadron, still formally known as the Blue Diamonds. I had made several cruises in which the Blue Diamonds were part of the Air Wing, so I was familiar with their excellent all-around reputation. I could not have been more fortunate and proud than to be a member with a former Blue Diamond and friend, Wayne Stevens, as its CO and the most competent, cohesive, and professional group of naval aviators and men I have known.
Wonderful, Captain. Since you had to return to Vietnam for a fourth tour, it was great that you were doing it in such good company. I hope that tour went well.
There were a few interesting and exciting times, though many mundane, routine memories of it blend with other cruises. We were assigned to USS America, which was based on the East Coast. For some reason, it was decided that the two attack squadrons would fly our 28 A-7s across the U.S. and down to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to load aboard the carrier in port. However, when we all arrived together at Guantanamo, we encountered heavy showers and thunderstorms with a broken overcast to over 30,000 feet. There was just one very wet runway, no traffic control, no alternate airfield, marginal fuel remaining, and no airborne refueling available.
That sounds like a bad beginning for the cruise.
Indeed, made worse when we discovered that wet runway braking action was poor, so we would probably have to put the hook down to engage the midfield chain link arresting gear, which required 30 minutes to manually reset, or risk going off the end of the runway.
28 airplanes, one runway, 30 minutes to reset the arresting gear, computes to possibly 14 hours to complete the recovery with how much fuel remaining.
You have the picture, Mike. It was a Navy disaster in the making. The A-7E had anti-skid braking, which prevented blown tires. But if there was no braking action at all in standing water from heavy rain, anti-skid was useless. Furthermore, because the arresting gear was installed halfway down the runway, the pilot's decision to lower the hook had to be made at touchdown, since an airplane off the end of the runway would endanger the next one if it failed to stop. So if we weren't going to run some airborne airplanes out of fuel, some had to land without the arresting gear.
What happened?
Needless to say, there was quite a scramble on the base, especially since it was a weekend and after normal working hours, with most of the air wing at the O Club bar celebrating happy hour. We were out of options. The only help was that a radar operator was found to man the station's only search radar. Considering its limited capability, the operator did an outstanding job of sorting out and controlling the traffic. Those airplanes with the lowest fuel state landed first. Those who touched down between the heaviest showers kept their hooks up. A few of those turned off their anti-skid when they sensed it wasn't working and blew tires rather than go off the end of the runway, but were able to clear the runway. Most, however, had to use the arresting gear because of no braking action in heavy rain. So it dragged out until there were only 2 airplanes airborne, which had so little fuel there was no time to reset the arresting gear used on the previous landing.
You're not going to say that you were one of those 2, are you?
Yep, you win a cigar, Mike. How'd you guess?
Because it's your story, Captain. It's just more fun that way, and you can say anything.
Easy, boy. Would I embellish a story to falsely glorify myself in a book which you say will be published, thereby giving the pukin dogs cause for mercilessly hoisting me on my own petard?
Sure, if you believe it won't get published in your lifetime, and it would get the dogs to remember you at happy hour. Didn't you say any publicity is good publicity?
No, that was my granny. One smart lady I never disagreed with. But it doesn't apply here, because I didn't do anything heroic. My wingman had less fuel, so I sent him down first, but he was going to have to clear the runway in a hurry for me.
So now you're going to say that he went off the end of the runway into the mud, so there was no way for you to land.
Damn, Mike, that's right. You're good. A chip off the old block. So what happened next?
You ejected and landed lightly on the O Club patio to join the gang for happy hour and bought the house around.
Love it, but I like my story better. There was an old runway across the harbor which had been out of use because it was far too short for any current aircraft except helicopters. Although it also had midfield arresting gear, it was rejected for our use because the runway was on a point of land with water at both immediate ends. If the hook skipped the arresting gear, The airplane was certain to end up in the harbor. So, Mr. Cigar, what's your version of what happened then?
That's easy, Captain. You ran out of fuel on touchdown. Your hook skipped the gear. You wet off the end and ejected just before the airplane splashed into the harbor and exploded. The pressure and fire from the explosion lifted you and your chute high over the surrounding hills. An hour later, you landed on Castro's patio and joined him for happy hour.
I knew you'd lose it. No more cigars for you. You had only one correct fact in your version. My hook did skip the arresting gear. Care to guess what really happened then?
You went to full throttle, barely managed to get airborne again, and caught the arresting gear on your next approach just as the engine flamed out. Then you were hailed as the hero of the day at happy hour, and the house bought you drinks into the wee hours?
Close, but no cigar. You were right about catching the arresting gear, but not about the flame out and happy hour. In fact, in good Navy fashion, there was never any official or informal discussion of the entire event. We handled it without a catastrophe. Case closed.
Still, that was quite a colorful introduction to the air wing for the A-7 squadrons and you, wasn't it?
I guess it might have been had it been peacetime, but events like that get lost in the clutter of war.
So you loaded 28 A-7s aboard American and set sail. Which port next en route to Vietnam?
Rio de Janeiro with its Valhalla of beach babes.
Did Nazira fly to Rio?
No, we put everything in storage, turned in the house keys, and Nazira flew home to stay with her parents in Hong Kong. Let's pick up in Brazil after lunch. Want to race up to the lodge?
No way, Captain. I'm not racing a man who can fly.